First off, I love my kids.
This is Learning to Dad.
I'm the cool dad. That's my thing.
With Tyler Ross.
What I do have are a very particular set of skills.
I'm going to have fun, and you're going to have fun.
Hello, welcome to Learning to Dad. This is Tyler Ross, and my guest today is Ronnie Ross. No relation, but I wish relation. Maybe back in the family tree somewhere.
Right, I think if you go far enough back, maybe you'll find something.
Yeah, and the good Scotch-Irish blood or something.
Exactly, Campbellton, Scotland.
So, I know our people came in through Latrobe, Pennsylvania.
Oh, yeah, southwest Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Is where we're from.
Dairy farmers.
Yeah, coal miners.
Coal
Lots.
miners, yeah.
Coal miners, steel workers, yeah. Worked on the railroads as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. But, we're here because, the point of the podcast is to talk to people that, I believe are thoughtful and deliberate and honest in the things that they've been successful in their professional life, because I think that those are the type of people that are thoughtful and deliberate in their personal life, especially when it comes to raising kids.
Yeah.
There's no pamphlet on how to raise your kid or my kid.
Turns out they're all different.
What a thing.
I know.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming and taking time to be with me.
Yeah, my pleasure. We're actually on spring break this week. I teach high school, and so it's nice to get early. Got a little workout in this morning, dropped the boy off at daycare, and here we are.
Yeah. Bright and early still.
I know.
So much day left. Yeah, so we've talked before. I admire your ability as a teacher so much. My sister was in your class, and she says, that looking back, how difficult your class was, but that you were definitely one of the best teachers and educators that, she's ever had.
Well, thank you. And it turns out, just like there's no pamphlet on how to be a dad, there's no pamphlet on how to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. Malcolm Gladwell has this really great article, and people feel different ways about Malcolm Gladwell, but it's how teachers are like NFL quarterbacks, and the idea is it's really hard to scout a good one. Yeah. Because there's just not preparation that translates well. So I know we're learning how to dad today, but there's lots of pamphlets I'd love to figure out how to write.
No, I think that's awesome, and because that's so important too. In a similar way, you're a leader to your kids, you're a leader to your classroom and those kids. And I know we've socialized together a lot, and listening to you talk about being a teacher is unlike listening to so many people talk about their profession.
Yeah.
You do it with such enthusiasm and passion, and I just appreciate it so much that I had a sister that had you. I would have loved to have had you as a teacher.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, it's the best, right? I mean, there are a few professions where your job is to take someone and help them get better at a thing. That's what I'm doing. I teach English, and I'm teaching them how to be better readers and writers and thinkers. And it's just incredible. And the fact that I get paid to do it is, really sometimes mind-blowing.
And you have a title at Highland. What is that? I found it just like it suits you perfectly.
So I have two. So I'm the freshman dean, and I'm also the English department chair. Okay. And so I oversee both of those. I've coached 28 sports seasons there. Wow. Which is fantastic. Won 4 state championships in sports I didn't play in high school. Yeah. Which is great because it shows that these skills are translatable from sport to sport. And so the sport I won state championships in was soccer, and I'm actually quite terrible at soccer, but I think that made me a better coach because I was more empathetic to the athletes when they didn't get it. Mm-hmm. That's why, I think Michael Jordan probably isn't a great coach because he just gets it.
Yeah, sure. That makes perfect sense to me. Yeah. And you going back to coaching, you come from a line of coaching, right? Like, let's talk a little bit about your growing up and what the leaders in your life were like.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ohio, in the Appalachia area, southeast Ohio. Both of my parents were teachers. My dad taught history. My mom was a speech and language pathologist, which is great because I had a speech impediment whenever I was young, and I couldn't say my R's.
Oh, wow. That's for Ronnie Ross. That's
Ronnie Ross got made fun of a lot. But luckily, mom helped me over that. And my dad was a basketball coach, and so I grew up in the gym. Yeah. And watching him, the way he led those young men on his team, what was such a formative experience for me. I'm actually Ronnie Ross the third named after my dad, who's named after my grandpa. And there's a certain, I think, pressure that comes from that legacy whenever those are men who you respect so much. My grandpa, right, has a high school education and busted his butt to raise 8 kids. One of my aunts...
8?
Yeah, one of my aunts is really special needs. She's pretty significantly physically and mentally handicapped. And to see the way my grandpa and my grandma brought those kids, all 8 of them still like each other, which is remarkable. Yeah. And so to see that, and then my dad himself, he has really severe Crohn's disease. He has about 2 feet of intestine left, and he's in pain pretty frequently. And so one of my values has always been this idea of mental toughness, and I think he instilled that from a young age, because I believe if you have that grit, then that's something that'll help get you through life, because life can be really hard.
Yeah.
And so whenever I think about my own son and how I want to raise my own son, that's at the top of the table. And not cheap toughness, not the kind of fake masculinity that so many people trade in, but a real backbone, a real sense of his values and how he can lean on them to get him through tough situations. And I think that's what my heroes, my parents have taught me.
That's amazing. That resonates so much with me, because so much of my reading lately has been centered around vulnerability, masculinity, and grit. And I had conversations about this all the time. And like, the context of our lives is so different than, our parents and their parents, that grit almost seems harder to come by. Like building a kid that has resilience, or coaching a group of young men or women to have resilience, seems hard these days. You finding that to be the case?
Well, that's why sports are so great, is they allow us to practice these skills in an environment where the stakes aren't as high as life.
Yeah.
And that, it's so important, I think, for kids to be in an organization like that, because it gives them the chance to succeed and fail, and they're basically practicing at it for life. Yeah. Is it harder to teach it nowadays? No, you just have the kids won't care and won't do what you ask until they know that you care. And so to me, I think people sometimes want to go in and be like, I'm going to be a tough coach. We're going to break them down and then build them up. Well, that's never going to work. The first thing you have to do is build a relationship. And once they know you're all in, man, kids will run through a wall for you, but it takes that initial investment. So I don't think it's harder. I think it just takes the work up front.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know you to be very gritty. I've known you long enough, and I know that you play collegiate football.
I did, yeah. I played that for 2 years. It was awesome.
Yeah, one of the great lines that I'm sure you were quoting someone else. If not, you deserve great credit for it. But it was, football in a lot of ways is moving another person against their will. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I heard that. So I heard that at a Hall of Fame speech, and he said, yeah, the best part of football is taking a man and moving him 2 feet backwards against his will. I was an offensive lineman, believe it or not. I was 285. I was really one of our smallest offensive linemen. I'm not anymore, because I picked up running, and like Forrest Gump, I started and I never stopped, I think. But yeah, and that's, I think about the sport taught me so much. And obviously football in today's culture, there's a lot of conversations around concussions and head injuries and things like that. Yeah. And certainly my body hurts from the sport. I've broken most of the bones in my hand. That's just how it happens. Yeah. But the lessons from the sport are invaluable, and the friendships I made along the way. There's nothing like sweating through 2-a-days to build a bond with someone else,
It couldn't be more true. All the memories that I look back on in like high school and college, so many of them center around sports and intramurals and the feeling of winning and losing, and the idea that you get so much out of failing, like you were talking about, losing.
Yeah.
Building grit in that way and looking back on yourself, figuring out how to improve.
Yeah, and I actually used to teach a leadership class, and one of our big units was learning from failure. And because failure, I think, in some ways can be fine as long as you learn. Mm-hmm. It's whenever you don't take those lessons away. And I actually brought in a Marine who commanded people in Iraq and lost people in battle. Wow, yeah. to help teach that unit. Because if he is able to learn from failure when the stakes are literal human lives, mm-hmm. then I think we can learn from failure in the classroom. We can learn from failure on the basketball court. And the kids always responded so well, that unit. Yeah, you got to learn though. Yeah.
Well, so tell me about, and like you graduated from college, and Did you major in education? Was that your intent from the get-go?
Oh, God, no. Whenever I was in high school, I thought I wanted to be some kind of physiological psychologist working with people with personality disorders, and I went into college thinking that.
Yeah.
Turns out I really hated chemistry class, and I hated 3-hour labs, and I hated my teacher. But at the same time, I was in English 101, and I loved my teacher. Yeah. I'm like, okay. And I'll never forget the phone call to my parents, and I said, so Mom, Dad, I think I want to double major in English and philosophy. And they were like, excuse me? And I said, yeah, I love it. And they said, okay. Yeah. And they sat down and we talked through the job prospects. And this is what you can expect to do. And this is maybe what you can expect to earn. And the idea was like, are you still all in? And I said, yeah. And so I graduated in the middle of the Great Recession. I graduated in 2009. The year I graduated college, only 20% of graduating seniors nationwide had a job offer before graduation. Yeah. I received my job offer from Highland the day before I graduated. And it was the best graduation gift anyone could get. I guess it wasn't a gift, right? I feel like I worked really hard for that.
Absolutely.
So I came out here, I followed a job and a girl. I still have the job. I have a much better girl who I'm now married to, have a son with. But yeah, I never thought I would fall into this. I'm so glad I have, because turns out I really, really love it. Yeah. But yeah, if you had asked even freshman year of college, Ronnie, what are you going to do? I would not have said this. So actually what I did then is I went back and I got a Master's of Science in Education from UPenn, because I had these subject area degrees, but I wanted to continue to learn how to teach. Yeah. And I had done some professional development up at Columbia, and the whole theory behind that was content knowledge and charisma only get you so far in the classroom. You better know how to do it too.
Yeah.
And so that's what I pursued then at the master's level.
So at what point in your professional career life did you have a child?
So little Ronnie is a year and a half old. So just actually over a year and a half old. So I had been into my job for over 8 years by that point. One of the things you find with, I think, our generation is people put off having kids, owning homes a little bit until they have a greater sense of financial stability. And having a kid is expensive. We paid $12.65 a month in daycare. Yeah. And so we wanted to make sure we were set, we were ready to go whenever we had Ronnie. So yeah, I was 8 years in. I lived in the area for 8 years. I loved it. I knew I wanted to raise my kid out here in the Piedmont, right? I grew up in the hills. I want to raise my kid in the hills.
No, that's perfect. I'm right there with you. I couldn't go. I keep wanting to get further and further out into the country.
No, it's the best. I saw on my way to drop Ronnie off at daycare yesterday, I saw a bald eagle just flying around, right?
It's amazing,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So, and we'll get into your running for Virginia State Senate.
Yeah.
But 18 months ago when you had little Ronnie, like, what do you think is the biggest difference in your professional approach between like life as Ronnie Ross without a child and life of Ronnie Ross as a dad? Like, did that change your perception of the way you go about your work?
Yeah, I think it gave me a greater sense of empathy for the students. I think I still hold them accountable really well, and I think I still hold the line. But yeah, every night whenever you go home and you see that kid and you know the way you feel about that kid is how hopefully all their parents feel about them, then every interaction with that kid, I think, becomes a more empathetic one. I think that's probably the biggest way, other than the distinct lack of sleep I'm running on in my professional life, and how much coffee I need to have to keep up. But yeah, I think it hasn't softened my approach to teaching, but it's made it much more understanding.
Yeah. Okay. So was Ronnie's birth part of what inspired you to run for Senate?
Yeah. I mean, I think having a kid has a great way of focusing and sharpening what you want to get out of life, what you want to do out of life, right? I'm a firm believer that you always want to leave something better off than you found it. Yeah. And whether that's a classroom full of kids, whether that's your neighborhood. And for me, I started to look farther and farther outward. I began to really worry about even the planet we were leaving Ronnie. I mean, what was that going to look like? What's the school system going to look like? And that might be a little selfish, right? That one of the things that instigated me to run was thinking about my own kids' future. But then I began to realize, well, there's so many kids to worry about, and there's so many of us currently here to worry about. And I'll never forget the moment it had been happening. The local party had been recruiting me to run for a while. And then I was driving in the car one day with my wife. My son was in the back in his car seat, 2 months old, and we were listening to something on the radio. And I was complaining, I don't know. And Josie looks over, Josie's my wife, she looks over at me and she goes, Ron, and I know when she calls me Ron, I'm in trouble, because it's always Ronnie, right? She goes, Ron, for the love of God, stop complaining and do something. I am so sick of it. And I said, Jose, what do you want me to do? Right? I vote, I volunteered, I try to make my community better. And she looked at me and she said, you're running for office. And I said, excuse me. I think I looked over at her. I know I should have my eyes on the road, but I think I looked over at her. I said, we have a 2-month-old baby. What in God's name do you want me to do? And I'll never forget what she said. So my goal, Tyler, was to marry someone who was both smarter than me and better looking than me. And I think I did both of that.
I agree.
And so if that's true, I should listen to them, right? And here's what Josie said. She said, here's what you need to understand. When it gets hard, and it's going to be very, very hard, I will always have your back, and you can always just look in your son's eyes. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay. So every night whenever I get home, if it's 11 p.m., if it's midnight, I always go in and check on him in his room, because it gives you that energy to keep going.
It's the best, isn't it? We stare at our sleeping kids every night.
Yeah.
So is there anything in particular that, in addition to wanting to kind of create this better world that your kid's going to live in, that any particular topic or platform that really speaks to you?
Yeah, so the slogan for our campaign is Together We Can Do Better. And the reason we chose that is because there's so much I love about Virginia right now. It's where I'm going to have my family. But there are things we can do better. As a teacher, I think about education a lot. Yeah. By some metrics, Virginia has the 12th best economy in the United States when you line up the states, but our per pupil funding ranks anywhere from 34th to 42nd.
Wow. And
that seems really out of whack to me. Mm-hmm. Until this most recent governor's budget, since 2005, our public school teachers had lost 10% of their income in inflation-adjusted numbers while paying more for their benefits. Mm. That's not going to attract the best and brightest to the profession if you can't live on it. Right? You have all kinds of stories about Fauquier County teachers either not able to live in Fauquier County or having to live with so many roommates or staying with their parents or things like that. Mm-hmm. So that's important to me. The environment is deeply important to me. I'm someone who loves to be outdoors. I hike. I camp a lot, right? Yeah. I think of myself as an outdoorsman, and I want to make sure my son can inherit the same planet I have. So there's some things at the General Assembly we need to do with solar power, for instance. Right now we regulate how much solar you can put on your house. I'd love to...
It's insane. We regulate how much you're allowed to put on your house.
Right. It seems like it's even a property rights issue. Like it's my property.
Yeah.
You can't have off-site solar right now. So there's some things I would like to do to open that up. Mm-hmm. I'd like to look at offshore wind. Right now we have 2 offshore windmills. We pay 74 cents per megawatt hour. Massachusetts only pays 21 cents per megawatt hour for their offshore winds. There's some things to look at there. And then ultimately, and a place I think a lot of our listeners are going to be able to really empathize, is healthcare is a huge issue for me.
Sure.
My family growing up, we had so many issues, and without my parents' good healthcare, we would have went bankrupt several times over. Yeah. And I'm deeply grateful for that. I know from my situation, I have a chronic condition. My wife does as well. Healthcare is expensive, mm-hmm. and access is hard. And so there's so much to work on there, from thinking about telemedicine for the future. But for telemedicine, you got to have broadband at your house.
Right.
All right. So to answer, that's kind of a long-winded way, Tyler, of saying there's so many things to do. Mm-hmm. But for me, education, environment, healthcare are 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I want to back up a little bit because you had mentioned something about adding value, feeling selfish. And that's something I've been trying to reconcile, the idea of like this podcast. Like, I selfishly want to learn how to be a better dad, selfishly want to talk to really cool people, but at the same time, I feel like it's a way I can add value. And like, you've selfishly pursued wanting to be a teacher, and at the same time, you've made this incredible impact on hundreds of kids.
Yeah.
So like, do you think about that in your head? Like, am I being selfish, or am I adding value, or is the and is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's deeply okay. selfishness can be a really great motivation for things, right? We just have to make sure it doesn't get out of control. I mean, you think about all the jobs that have been created by our really wonderful entrepreneurs because they wanted to develop this thing or they wanted money to lead to their own financial freedom. And along the way, they created all these opportunities for other people. So yeah, I do think selfishness can be a really great motivation to lead for good. It just can't go unchecked. Yeah. Right, because it can also lead to some really bad things. You think about the robber barons back in the day and things like that. I think part of it, right, is I'm pretty religious. I'm a pretty faith-filled man. And one of the things my Christianity, I think, grounds me in is to be aware of putting others first. Yeah. And so selfish motivations, it always kind of rings that bell, right? So am I doing this for me or am I then going to help make things better?
Yeah, I like the 49-51 rule. You know, as long as you're giving 51 and taking 49, you're still a producer in our economy, in our, energetics, in our love, and whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about your profession, right? You are a realtor, and you got into that for particular selfish reasons, but you're helping people find houses, and then they'll turn those houses into homes. Yeah. And they'll have so many great memories there, and you help them get to that point where they're going to have a place they love, and it came out of maybe selfish motivations, but now you've helped people find a place that they can really fall in love with.
Yeah, totally. And I've struggled with that selfishness versus adding that value, and I wanted to scale it. Like I'm helping one family or one person, maybe 3 or 4 at a time, maybe 40 or 50 a year. Like how do I, they say the new millionaire or billionaire is the person that positively impacts millions or billions of people. Yeah. And so like, how do we scale that?
Well, and I think also it's why it's important to have a really great team around you and a team that's not afraid to give you honest feedback. And maybe it's your partner, right? My wife is a great member of my team. My campaign manager, she's a 20-year Marine vet, so she has no problem giving me feedback. So whenever you're doing something, they're just, making sure that 51-49 is there. And as long as you have people in your life who are willing to be honest with you, I think you're in a good position. Yeah. Which actually has to do with child rearing too, right?
Most definitely. Yeah, Most definitely. Yeah. So, like, speaking of, that's kind of the point of the conversation that we're having to some extent. But, what do you feel like your role is to your son as a dad?
I mean, so many things that are so hard to articulate, especially because he's younger. I guess I'm going to go big picture. Think about as he's growing up. I mean, one is to be a role model. I want to be someone that he can look up to and that he can be proud of. Another one is to teach him or help to, I guess, instill my values. Even in politics, policy comes out of value.
Sure, yeah.
And so
it should anyway.
Right, yeah. And so I mentioned earlier this idea of grit and mental toughness, but also kindness, compassion, empathy, a sense of equality, a sense of justice, helping to show him where those things are important. One of the things I've learned teaching is that kids actually like boundaries. They like knowing where that edge is. Now they'll push against it, right? Yeah. And but they like knowing where that edge is. So part of my job too is to show him where those boundaries are, whether it's in his behavior or in other things. But right now, if we're getting down to brass tacks, I guess my job is change him when he needs change, feed him when he's hungry, help to entertain him. We're working on, so he really likes balls. Yeah. And so he kicks a lot with his right foot. So we're working on the lleft foot.
18 months old.
Right. Left, boy. I know. So, yeah. So, things like that or read to him, right? We just went to, the new bookstore opened in Old Town Warrenton. Yeah. And so he picked out Grumpy Monkey as his book. And so, we read to him, right? Yeah. All right, so it was kind of a winding answer to your question, but it's, man, there's so much to do as a father.
Isn't there? And as a teacher, do you feel like that's kind of equipped you in a way differently that a non-teacher might be equipped to be a parent?
I often joke, I think I'll have a better sense of him as a teenager than I do now because I teach teenagers. And so I have a little bit of a sense. And I know, of course, yours is always going to be different. Yeah. I think what's equipped me is I know professionally how to cause learning. Mm-hmm. And so that's helped me whenever we're working on talking or we're working on like skills like kicking a ball, is literally the job of my profession is to cause learning to happen. Yeah. It's a science. I mean, it's an art, but it's also a science. Yeah. And so because I've been able to pull back some of that and say, oh, this is how our brains learn, I think that's helped me raise my kid. I just have to make sure whenever we're kicking with our left foot that I remember he's 1.5 years old.
So do you find you have to, over the years, I've known you to be a very intense competitor, and do you feel like you've kind of come off that intensity a little bit, or do you think you're still like right there having to hold it in, like reminding yourself, like, Ronnie's 18 months old?
I'm still pretty competitive. We have some other little neighborhood kids, and I'm always like, oh, how's this going to go? And they were like, and I'm like, so settle down. He's a year and a half old. But my wife is tremendous for that. But even like, he'll want to climb something, and I'm like, keep climbing, Ronnie. And she's like, he's going to hurt himself. So
he's going to learn.
Right. That's feedback. That's immediate feedback. Whenever he falls down.
That's
right.
Being caused to learn.
And then what she'll say is, that's fine, but then you're dealing with that immediate feedback whenever he's bleeding or crying. That's the trade-off. So.
Well, I'd be interested to get your spin on education, because you're so well experienced. Like, maybe from a grander scheme, we can talk about like how you see education changing, and then the way that it makes sense to you in today's 2019 context of how you foresee Ronnie's education looking as he gets older.
Yeah, so I think one of the really smart things that's happening in education right now is it's becoming more skills-based and less content-based. That doesn't mean, so one of the things that really annoys me is whenever people say you don't have to memorize anything. That's really, really untrue, because the way learning happens, the simplest model we have is you take information in your environment, and in your short-term memory, you hook it to information in your long-term memory. Okay. And so if you don't have things memorized and in your long-term memory, you can't do anything in your short-term memory, right? Like, there's just nothing to hook to. Yeah. And so you have to have things memorized. That's why I still give assessments that are memorization. It's important. But what we've realized as the world develops, as the world changes, as the careers our kids are going to have don't even exist maybe now, whenever they're, think about podcasting, when did that, that's a newer skill. But skills are translatable. And so as we think about teaching them things like critical thinking, critical reading, how to write, how to communicate, the soft skills, scientific thinking, which is different from, it's a different kind of thinking, I think that's a really smart way to go about it. Also with education, we've tried to be more project-based, because it's this idea you learn when you're iterative, you learn when you're doing things with real stakes and real outcomes. I think about if I am doing a test, well, that's not really authentic, right? Who's the audience for the test? Why am I performing on this test? What's the point? But if I'm doing projects, working in teams, working collaboratively with things, well, then that becomes a much better reflection of what you're doing in life. And so I think that's a positive thing. Where I think Virginia really needs to go, and the research bears this out, is to early childhood education. We have one of the best collegiate systems in the nation. It's probably us in California, right? Or one or two, and I would give it to us. So, but we don't have a universal pre-K system here, which is really problematic in a lot of ways, because early childhood learning sets the stage for later learning. It also incidentally allows parents back into the workforce faster. Yeah. And so it has positive economic outcomes. But I think that's the next move for Virginia. Some states do. Florida does. DC has universal pre-K, for instance. But yeah, it's so important, because I think about my mom's job as someone who works with people, little kids that age. 3-year-olds will come to her a year and a half behind.
Yeah.
And
jeez.
Right. And
wow.
And so that not only is problematic for the kid itself, but it's problematic for the community.
Yeah.
Because I want my community to be full of really thoughtful people who can contribute to our democracy and can get jobs that will be meaningful for them and contribute to the economic robustness of our area. And so, whenever I think education is moving in some really great directions, but I think we need to think more about how we make early childhood education more accessible to more people.
Interesting. So I don't know if this is a fair question to ask you, but like, if you could wave a magic wand and lay out little Ronnie's education from here through high school, like, what's that look like?
So it would start with pre-K with reasonable class sizes. And then you move on to K, right? And you move through that. I think one of the things that's really important is keeping class size reasonable. Yeah. For instance, at the high school level, we know even with a master teacher, any class that's over 25 people is going to have negative educational outcomes. Wow. Because it's just a teacher can't teach a class that size. He's also going to be at a preschool and kindergarten where he's dirty, where he's outside. Loudoun County actually just increased how much recess they're allowed to have, which is great. They used to only be able to have 15 minutes of recess a day. It's up to 30 minutes. Kids need to play. They need to be outdoors. I am hyper competitive, Tyler. I got my master's from an Ivy League school, but dear God, let kids play.
Yeah.
Let them have fun. Not every minute of every day needs to be scheduled learning,
right?
Because there's so much you can learn outside too. And so I think especially his elementary school experience would have a lot of that. He would be exposed to a lot of different kinds of kids from different backgrounds, because in today's world, you better have cultural fluency.
Yeah.
You better be able to interact with people who are different from you. And so I'd love that to start from a young age. His learning a second language would start in elementary school. I'd love him to learn Spanish. Yeah. I think Mandarin is really important too.
Really?
But yeah, definitely Spanish. In middle school, so we know children's attitudes about education solidify in middle school. So I want him to have a middle school experience where he has teachers he loves and cares about him and starts to develop that love of school. I want them to require summer reading.
Yeah.
Every summer you need to read 6 to 10 books in order to not slide back on your reading that you picked up during the year. So I want that required summer reading. But I want him to be able to pick what he reads, because choice is super important. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of a disjointed answer to your question. But I want him to play. I want him to have fun. I want him to learn languages. I want him to meet different people. I want him to like school.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I feel like whatever jobs are existing now, if that's the end goal, if that's part of the purpose of education, which of course there are many other purposes, but like the jobs that our kids are going to have probably don't exist yet. So our kids need to love to learn how to learn.
Yeah. Oh, it's the best. You know, they say our generation will have 7 careers over the course of their life, not jobs, careers. Yeah. And I can only imagine what it's going to be for our children. Yeah. And so they need to have that flexibility. They need to love to learn. Yeah, which is why I listen to so many podcasts. It's because I'm always driving and trying to learn.
Yeah, and I think that I mean, not to get political with the political candidate, but that's something that, you know, regardless of your politics, I admire your desire to constantly be learning. How many times we've had conversations where if you've cited something from a book that you're reading now or that you've read 100 times already, always impresses me, and I appreciate that.
And you can learn from anyone. I think about all that you've taught me from your expertise. I don't know real estate, but you do. And if I'm willing to listen, I can learn some things.
Yeah, and I that's probably an important part of education, is that every single person on the planet has a uniqueness about them from which they can express something that you don't know or that you can learn from.
And it requires a humility on your part, I think, to be able to listen.
Perfectly said, I think. And that's something I'm trying to keep in check all the time.
We're always working on things, right? We're always working.
So more about being a dad, I could talk to you about education. We could do a whole new podcast on education. But I'd be interested, we'll get into kind of like, what's a quality of yours as a father that you're particularly proud of?
My willingness to constantly be surprised by my own son.
Yeah. And
my willingness to experience wonder. I think wonder is such an important thing to have in life, whether you climb a mountain and you look out and you go, wow. But my willingness to look at my son, and the first time he said, please, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
That to me is the thing I'm the most proud of, because I think oftentimes love can also be rooted in wonder and surprise. And, every day when it can feel the same, okay, get up, change the diaper, eat breakfast, take him to daycare, go to work, pick him up. Finding those little moments of surprise and wonder, and being willing to be surprised at just how magical your kid is, I think it's really important.
I might suggest to you to be available to that wonder.
Yeah.
You have to be super present. You can't be thinking about the 100 other things that you have going on. Your coaching, your relationship, your Senate run. Like, so is there anything in particular you do to like stay grounded when you're around your son, or to be present?
So one is actually, believe it or not, my campaign manager schedules family time on my calendar.
Yeah.
And that's great, because I know that's all I'm supposed to be doing then. Mm-hmm. So when I look at my day on my calendar, every hour or half hour is regimented. Yeah. And so she schedules workout time for me, and she schedules family time for me. And that's one, because I know I'm not supposed to be grading essays for work or answering emails or talking to folks. That helps me stay present. And also earlier we talked about that feedback. Mm-hmm. My wife, if I pull up my phone to do something, she'll say, "Hey Ronnie, let's play with your son," and her giving me that feedback helps. And also, he's just kind of cool, and so I like being around him. He's just kind of a cool dude.
Well, somebody, if you haven't heard of him already, I think somebody that you would really enjoy is Jason Silva. Are you familiar with him?
No, I'm not.
He's like a modern-day philosopher that, casts this wide net of ideas and brings them all together to his own little thing. He's got a YouTube channel called Shots of Awe, and his whole thing is we need to be available to be in awe, seek out experiences.
Oh, wow.
I had a guest actually suggest to me that, of all the things he had done into his 20s and 30s, that once he had a kid, he could do those things again and experience the awe because he's seeing them through his kid's eyes.
Oh my! The first time I went hiking with Ronnie, I was like, oh my God! Can you imagine what he thinks about that waterfall?
Oh, yeah.
Or because how many waterfalls have we seen in our life?
Yeah.
But then this is the first one Ronnie's seen, and I'm just like, oh my God! Or the first time he went into snow, just to watch him figure out what is this. And snow is really cool. If you think about how weird and wonderful snow is, it's just, you can get so surprised, and the world's pretty great.
We've conditioned ourselves to not appreciate it, but I think kids bring you to that a little bit.
Yeah,
that's so cool. So what's your greatest hope for Ronnie?
That he finds something he loves and he does it. I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, maybe. I think happiness is overrated.
Yeah.
I think people who base their lives around being happy, and we actually have good research that backs this up, often find themselves really unhappy. But people who base their lives around meaning end up being quite happy. And so what I hope for Ronnie is that he finds something that helps him make meaning out of his life, and he's able to pursue and do that thing and love that thing. And I think everything else will come from it. And it doesn't just have to be one thing. I get meaning from my faith. I get meaning from my family. I get meaning from my work. That, I think, more than anything else, that's what I hope for him.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a wonderful answer. No controversy on this side of the table. Anyway. So as a dad, what do you feel like you're preparing your son for?
Life is really hard. And so I think part of it is I'm preparing him for the resilience that life requires. I love life. It is wonderful. We talked about surprise and awe, but there are moments that are really, really hard. And so preparing him for that, and part of preparing him for that is letting him know that it's okay to ask for help. In fact, sometimes it's necessary to ask for help. We've talked a lot about grit, but part of being gritty is saying I'm not embarrassed to go seek the help I need. And so I'm preparing him for that. I'm also preparing him to enter a world that he doesn't know and to try to navigate it and make sense of it. And so I think those two things are the things that I most frequently think about.
Yeah. I had a conversation this morning with a 92-year-old German lady who you know probably.
Yeah.
And we had just got to talking, and she, in her German accent, was talking about being 14 or 15 years old during World War II in Berlin, and that she was so fortunate that the soldiers there who were raping the people around them, that they could obviously identify that she was one to be left alone. I guess she was German or whatever. And she went on to continue about, compared that to today, and went on to talk about, I don't know if I'm so glad I grew up in that time as opposed to this time. Going, that sounds crazy. Like, she preferred to grow up as miserable in a world that was.
Yeah.
Like, she said she'd be scared to have kids in today's world. Like, the context of that just blew my mind. So I wonder, do you feel like there's an advantage or disadvantage to the context that you grew up in, the era that you grew up in versus today? Like, what are some of the differences that you think about?
The biggest advantage is we didn't have smartphones. And I think that's so clear.
You say that's an advantage to us that we did not?
Exactly.
Okay.
That, we grew up with the internet. The internet wasn't there whenever we grew up, which I think is hugely important. I grew up in a neighborhood where my parents would let us run all day and then come back at night because we felt safe enough. And I'm not sure that parents feel the same way today, that you can just go have the run of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I don't think they do.
I think that I'm interacting every day like I do with students. I see how hard, especially social media, makes it on them. And it's no wonder that we have a mental health issue, and why we need to invest in counselors in our schools is because of the constant feedback, often you're inadequate feedback that social media can give.
Yeah.
So I think that was a huge advantage. And I think my wife and I have a lot of conversations about what boundaries, barriers, and rules are we going to put around our son in technology? Mm-hmm. What do we allow? What do we not allow? Yeah, God, it's tough to navigate. It's really, really hard.
And it changes so fast.
Yeah.
I mean, trying to relate to, just trying to keep up with the language. I'd imagine you hear the high school kids talking in like a language that it's hardly decipherable. With exception to you being around it. Like, that's so extra. That's probably old now.
It keeps me really cool and hip, being a high school teacher. Yeah. No, it does. Yeah, I worry a lot about that, and I think that was really a great advantage. And there are advantages to social media and smartphones. There are advantages the fact that if I wanted to know what's the deepest lake in the United States, I could look it up right now. Yeah. Incidentally, it's Crater Lake. But also, when I open Instagram and I see everyone else's fabulous Instagram life, and I think about my own, that's tough.
Yeah, I was talking to one of my best friends who's got a 13-year-old son, and he said that he came home, opened up his phone, showed a picture, and said, "Dad, I only got 4 likes on my photo." And it's like his self-esteem was tied to how many people double-tapped on whatever picture he did, which is that false feedback.
Yes, right, and it goes back to the idea of finding meaning, right? That's not a meaningful experience. Posting a thing and then have someone like it, there's no meaning there. So being able to root yourself, I love that your logo is actually a tree. Trees are really important to me. I think they're a great symbol. Being able to root yourself to something deeper than that is so, so important. And there's a famous quote in leadership. I don't know. Some people attribute it to Abigail Adams, but the idea of leadership is planting the seeds of trees under whose shade you will never sit.
That means so much to me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And that just ties it back to what I want to do for Virginia, for my son, for my students. Just plant those seeds.
Yeah.
That will come to fruition.
That's one of my favorite quotes. Truly, I don't know who said it, but it's been attributed to a couple different people.
Right.
So, what's in addition, what's an advantage you think they have that Ronnie's going to have that you didn't have? I know you said the internet is both an advantage and disadvantage, but is there anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, the hyper-connectivity of the world, which plays to the internet. But he'll get to grow up interacting with so many different kinds of people than what I did, which is really phenomenal. Whether that's over the internet or in real life, the world's just become a lot smaller since I was young. And I think that is such a huge advantage for him. I think another advantage he'll have is we've been getting, clearer and clearer about what good learning is, about things like that. So he'll benefit from that. But I don't know, so one of the things about being, in some ways, a historian, because those were some of my focuses, is you see how often the things we think about just perpetuate. Like every generation, right, is worried about the generation coming after them and thinks that they have it easier than they had it, and all that stuff. One of my favorite examples is in ancient Greece, people were worried, some of the philosophers, that writing was going to make people dumber, because if you could write something down, you didn't have to remember it. And we have these great pieces of actually writing, describing the people's fear that writing, the art of writing, was going to make people dumber. And so, you have this cycle. But I think Ronnie's biggest advantage is just how small the world has become. And that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I know globalization to have always been like planes, trains, automobiles, how fast can you move this thing to another? But now it's information, and the ability to collaborate with anybody is going to propel us into this future that is going to come upon us so fast. I'm fascinated to see what comes. You think about what Thomas Jefferson would say sitting in a plane today.
I know. Which, by the way, pivots us back to that early conversation about being present and finding those moments to go slow. When the world moves fast, how do you root yourself, ground yourself? And so, I could hop in a plane and fly to Seattle, but sometime I should probably take a train. And sometimes I should probably drive, because you experience the world differently whenever you do that. So I think finding the slow moments in life is something else that's important to me as I raise Ronnie, and helping him experience those with me.
Finding the slow moments in life. I want to write that down so I don't forget.
No, it's one of the things that blows my mind is how quickly we went from the Wright brothers learning how to fly to being on the moon.
Right?
whoa, things move fast. And so we got to occasionally be slow.
Yeah, the unfathomable speed is only increasing.
Yeah.
And so the things that we couldn't even conjure will be here in 5 years, that our mind's not capable of understanding is going to be here before you know it.
The unknown unknowns.
Yeah. So in this world that Ronnie's going to grow up in, what are some of the characteristics that you hope that he will have?
So I think it goes back a little bit to the grit, to the empathy. Another one is openness. I haven't said that yet, but I think that's really openness to experience, openness to different kinds of people. And I hope he does have a strong moral compass, something he can come back to, that he can be grounded in, that will help him make decisions, right? Because when you don't know what the future is going to look like, one thing you can always fall back on to help you navigate it are your values.
So vulnerability is a word that I have this kind of plus-minus relationship with,
yeah.
But the way that I mean it is the way most people interpret it, I think. So when I ask you, like, what role does vulnerability play in your life, maybe in general, and then maybe as a parent?
It's one of those words I'm glad that we're reclaiming, because I think for so much of certainly my childhood, being vulnerable was seen as a negative thing.
Right.
And maybe in some ways, because whenever you're vulnerable, you can be taken advantage. But boy, I think it makes you have a much healthier emotional life when you're willing to be vulnerable. And that means recognizing your limits. And so part of my being vulnerable is recognizing my limits as a father. There are things I do well and there are things I do poorly, and I need to work on the things that I do poorly. But it also means being vulnerable with yourself and being kind with yourself and not beating yourself up whenever you make those mistakes. The same is true as a teacher. There are some lessons I'm like, holy God, that was terrible. So I need to be vulnerable enough to get better, kind enough with myself. I had a professor in grad school who said every week, every Friday night, he would have what he called a cognac moment. He would pour himself a cognac and he would think about all the things he did right during the week, because we can persevere on the things we do bad. And so he would then drink the cognac and think about the positive things he did that week. Yeah. And so I think I've tried to allow myself cognac moments. But yeah, I'm really interested in vulnerability. I think it's really important. We've seen the destruction that can occur whenever we're not able to articulate our emotions. Yeah. And that's the way I was raised. I mean, I was raised the son of two really tough men. Yeah. And so there's a particular code that comes along with it. And I think I've tried to take the best parts of that code, and it's made me stronger. But also, and I have to tell you, seeing my dad get more vulnerable with age.
Right.
Growing up, I never saw my dad cry.
Yeah.
Now he can be like a weeping mess.
Yeah.
And I think that can be really good once you get over how awkward it is.
No, I'm right there with you. I know since having children, I cry at everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a dad, being vulnerable and open, you certainly allowed yourself to accept feedback. Like in the last 18 months, how do you feel like you've become a better dad?
I think one way I've become a better dad is I've been more patient. You know, working with high schoolers, you say a thing and you expect them to do it, or you expect them to eventually do it. Kids don't work that way at his age. And so having more patience with Ronnie is really, really important. Mm-hmm. Having less fear about him. The best thing was whenever we were taking him home from the hospital, seeing how the nurses were kind of like really rough with him. And I'm like, oh, he's not going to break. So, but yeah, and patience is not something I do well. I am not a particularly patient person. My boss can tell you that. And so having to learn to be patient with Ronnie has been really important. And I think that's the best way the best thing I've learned.
Yeah. Awesome. So what kind of dad would you like to be remembered as?
So I'm going to start by saying I tell people all the time, I wonder, as a teacher and coach, I wonder what kind of parent I'll be whenever my son is the student and the athlete. Josie and I, my wife and I, laugh about that a lot. But you ask, what kind of parent do I want to be remembered as? God, someone who was there and could always be leaned on, and who Ronnie knows loved him very, very deeply. And everything I did, right or wrong, good or bad, was born out of that love. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make mistakes, but I hope they're mistakes made out of love, and I hope that Ronnie will forgive me when he sees why I did the things I did. And my successes will be born out of love too. I hope we share a name, right? He's the fourth. And I think that's a really wonderful bond. And I hope that's one that will persist. I hope he understands that everything I did because I love him so dearly.
Do you remember, I'm making an assumption on this question, but do you remember when you found out that your dad was human?
Yeah. Two different ways. So my dad has, like I said, really advanced Crohn's disease. Mm-hmm. And so whenever we were young, you'd like fight and wrestle as you did. And I learned I could win any wrestling match by hitting him softly in the stomach, just a little tap, because he would double over in pain. Yeah. Because it just hurt so bad. Mm-hmm. And so physically I was like, oh, this man can be hurt. Because you think of, your dad's like Superman. Yeah. And so that was kind of shocking to me. And then another one is, in high school, or I guess whenever I was in middle school, my dad had to work several jobs to make ends meet. And so he would teach by day and then work in a garage door factory by night. And he would still make it to our sports games. But what that meant was he was just ragged and run down. And to see this mountain, at least in my mind, even though I'm bigger than he is, this mountain of a man just be worn and chiseled down was another time. And then really the first time I disagreed with him, like politically about a thing, where I just realized I saw the world differently from him, and I thought I'm right. And I think that was really stunning too. Yeah. I think our relationship has gotten deeper and better because I've realized how fallible and human he is. But it was a shock to the system.
So that shock, do you think that you would want to accelerate that earlier into Ronnie's life or later, or let it happen organically?
I think let it happen organically. There's so much to plan for. Yeah. I don't think I'd plan for that. I think my goal with him is to just be authentically me, and let him see that authenticity is a thing that should be valued. Yeah. But when you're being authentic, you uncover all your warts.
This is something that I think about and we're talking about now, but that moment when you learned about your dad being not necessarily infallible, in the moment in the future where Ronnie's going to learn that about his dad, when I learned it about mine, do you feel like that's going to give him a particular type of I feel like it gave me permission to be anything other than perfect. Yeah. It felt like it gave me permission to fail in the good way, the way that you can learn from. Do you share that experience?
Yeah, because I love my dad and I'm proud of him, and the fact that he can mess up and still be that person I love and I'm proud of is really gives permission, I think, for me to be that way too.
Yeah, I think that my desire to try to be perfect in my parents' eyes, my dad's eyes, was, I think, detrimental to my growth. I think it was probably overly conservative, wasn't authentically me. Yeah. And so I think about how quickly I want my kids to see that I'm human, and that I want to give them that permission to be human and be themselves instead of living up to some conjured concept that they believe I expect them to be.
Yeah, knowing that I think we're always becoming ourselves. That I don't think that yourself is a fixed thing. Yeah. You're always kind of reaching to make yourself better. For what it's worth, Aristotle called it a teleological conception of self, that you're never a finished product. Right. And you just keep working to be better. Yeah. If you can do that, man, I think you're going to be fine.
I know you know the Vince Lombardi quote, the pursuit of perfection.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I'll let you say it for our listeners. But.
Well, I'm sure it's a paraphrase of some sort, but it's like, perfection is unobtainable, but its pursuit is, a worthy cause. Yeah. To continue to try to be better.
And in fact, that is the cause. Yeah. Right? Like, you got to find the moments and the joy, and I know it's a cliche, in the journey, because our destination is we're going to be dead.
Right, yeah.
And so
we're born into the grave.
Right. Sure, and so we might as well. Boy, love the time there. Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And as a Green Bay Packers fan, I have no problem supporting Vince on that one.
All right. Well, I want to jump into the more short answer, kind of rapid question answer stuff. Yeah. So, what are some traits that you hope little Ronnie's going to have growing up? I think I've asked that already, but we can.
Yeah. I'll give you maybe my top 4 or whatever. Toughness, empathy, openness, curiosity.
What do you think the best vehicles for those things to be instilled in him are? Like education, sports, friends at home?
Modeling, I think is really important. I'm a huge fan of sports. I think sports teaches a lot of it. But I think a lot of it comes from modeling and then your expectations that you set. And so if you yourself make curiosity a value and you model that for your kids, I think that'll help. That'll go a long way.
Yeah, I've never felt a greater sense of obligation to the world or my kids to be as best as I can than since I had kids, because it allows that example. Yeah. So what's a great piece of parenting advice that you've been given?
A great piece of parenting advice that I've been given. One of the first things my dad said to me was to be kind to yourself. Another piece of advice is to sleep when the baby's sleeping. a really practical piece of advice. Another great piece of advice I got was ask your wife how she needs you, like how she needs your help. Because I think so much of the early stages, especially if you're breastfeeding, can feel like your wife's doing all of it. So just being available and saying, how do you need me to help? But honestly, the best piece of advice I got is no one can give you the perfect advice for you, but everyone can be there for you when you need their advice.
Yeah.
And I thought that was the most useful thing. So
cool. So if you're going to write a book about your life over the last 18 months plus 9 months of Josie's pregnancy, like what would be the name of some of the chapters?
Adventure can still happen. All through Josie's pregnancy, we went out, we hiked, we went canoeing. Yeah. In fact, one time we were canoeing out on Lake Huron, and this woman had fallen out of her canoe, and so we got out to help her, and Josie hopped out. She goes, "You're pregnant!" And Josie says, "Yeah, now let's get you back in your canoe." She was like 7 months pregnant. 9 months pregnant, so we were taking a hike, and it was supposed to be a mile hike, and I got us lost. And so 3.5 miles later, Josie, I remember, goes, "If I have this baby in the frickin' forest." But even since then, we've taken Ronnie to national parks, to Mount Rainier. We've gone hiking with him. I've ran 5Ks with him. And so I think adventure can still happen is one of the chapters. Another chapter is learning to say I'm sorry. Both to my wife and to my kid and to me, would be definitely another one. Another chapter would be stop letting your grandparents spoil him so much, because it just makes it harder. Josie's an only child, and so her parents spoil him, so do mine. But then the next chapter would be, but lean on your grandparents and love them. They're there to help. They want to help. But yeah, I think my biggest thing is it's okay to still have fun with kids.
Yeah, and how about a working title for the chapter you're writing right now?
Ooh, boy, that's a fantastic question. Without getting too cheesy, I'm doing this for you.
Awesome.
That I don't get to see him every night, but I'm doing this out of a love.
I love that. That's awesome. What is something that is on your not to-do list as a dad? Something that is non-negotiable, you're not going to do it?
So this is interesting, and shame him for when he tried something and failed is non-negotiable. That will never happen, because the fact that you tried and battled is worth it in and of itself.
I think that's wonderful. Who's your favorite television dad?
Oh, Phil Dunphy on Modern Family.
Nobody said that, and that I love it.
Yeah, because he's him, right? yeah, definitely Phil Dunphy.
Cool. So Lewis House, I don't know if you've heard of him. He has a podcast called School of Greatness. Hundreds of podcasts. It's top one. I enjoy it a lot. But he asks a question and actually recommended that I ask the question. When do you feel the most loved?
During family hugs. Whenever all the three of us hug each other in the morning before we go to work, or at night whenever we come home. Honestly, probably during family hugs, or whenever Ronnie's playing and he'll bring me a toy over to play with too.
Yeah, it's great. All right, this is one of my favorite questions also. Tim Ferriss has asked this question. It's the billboard question. If on 95 you've got a billboard and all the dads on the planet are driving 70 miles an hour past it, so you got a billboard to share a message with them, what's a message or a piece of advice that you might put on that billboard for everyone to read?
For every dad to read. Sign your kid up for a sport, but if he doesn't like it, find something else that's a group activity.
We figure out how to condense
right,
that.
I know, right? I know. Right, yeah, size 12 Times New Roman on a billboard. But I just think sports are so powerful, and I know not everyone likes sports. Like I get that, but there are group activities out there for them. My wife was in the band. That formed her. Mm-hmm. For other people, it's the robotics team. Yeah. Like find that team. Because there's so much, like, put your kid in a team. I don't care what they're doing. I don't care if they're competitive tiddlywinks. I don't care. Put them in a team.
I've thought lately that, school, as much as school educates your kids, it's the stuff that happens after school that really makes them who they are. So I don't, like we talked about, we look back at school and such, and sure, there's some great teachers, but really it's all about, like, the community with your sports and the teams and your coaches, like, made you the human.
Yeah, and it's true. And with teachers, teaching starts with relationships. Mm-hmm. So the teachers I remember aren't the ones who had the best content info, or maybe even the ones who I learned the most from. Yeah. They're the ones I knew cared about me. And the same thing with coaches. Mm-hmm. In high school, my football coach assigned us summer reading. Yeah. And so every day during 2-a-days, in between practices, we'd have to unpack a chapter together. And it was always summer reading that was like life lessons. One was called The Traveler's Gift, I remember. And I had all my football coaches sign the book for me.
Yeah.
And I knew he cared because of that.
That's amazing. So, what is a gift, a physical gift, a thing? If money was no object and you could give a gift to all the dads, what's a gift, something that you might give to every dad?
My first thought was a fully funded 529 plan for your kid, because college is expensive. But, college isn't for everyone, and not everyone's going to go to college. So that isn't a particularly good gift, even though it was the first thing on my mind. Well, the gift I would give to every single dad. My next thought was a bottle of really nice whiskey, because I like whiskey, but as a chance to have that cognac moment, to celebrate yourself, to take a minute and look back at the week. So I guess, so here's the gift I'm going to give my dad. Something in a box that you enjoy that will cause you to stop for a moment and think back on everything you did right for your kid that week. Yeah. So maybe it is cognac, maybe it is whiskey, maybe it's a nice piece of cheesecake. I don't know. Yeah. But just something that allows you to say, I'm good at this thing, and I failed all these times, but look at all these other times I was great.
Yeah, a wonderful answer. I'm going to call this our last question, and it's one that I really like. So this is recorded. It may last forever, and perhaps Ronnie's great-great-grandkids will get to hear it. Like, what's a message that each generation might benefit from, or something you'd like to say to the line of Rosses?
Especially being the third in the line, that's tough.
Yeah, it could be anything from practical advice to messages of adoration, or.
So I'll tell you the most important thing my dad told to me. I was having a particular bad week. I was in grad school. My girlfriend had just broken up with me. My car had just been totaled. My student loans were coming due. And I talked to him, and I was just I was at rock bottom. And what he said to me is, good thing you're tough enough. And it made me pick my head up and know that I could do it. And so what I would want to say to the line of Rosses is, if your parents are anything like mine, you will be tough enough, but beyond that, you are enough. One of the first presents I got my wife was a piece of art that said, you are enough on it. And whatever you are, whatever you might think about, you're good, you're bad, you're ugly, you're beautiful, it's enough because you're you. And you being you is good enough for this world. And you being you has something you can contribute to this world. All of us were born onto a stage that wasn't of our choosing. We're both authors in our own narratives and characters in other people's narratives, right? But wherever you are on that stage, man, you're you, And that's pretty freaking cool because everyone else is already taken, so you might as well be you.
I think that's beautiful. Moving. Thanks a lot, brother.
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
you being here. And for the benefit of anybody listening, it is campaign season now. It may not be in 5 years when somebody's listening to this,
course,
but you have a website that you could direct people to that they could learn about you and your campaign, your platform.
Yeah, so it's RonnieRoss.com. I spell Ronnie, RONNIE. RonnieRoss.com. Unclear how that domain was available, but it was. So yeah, go there. You can find out about me, find out about my positions. And, we've talked a lot about what inspires me and my values. And now you'll see maybe some of the policy things that came out of those values. But yeah, this has been a real pleasure, Tyler. Thank you for having me so much. This is a much better morning than grading essays about the Odyssey, I promise you. So I've really enjoyed our time together. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Ronnie.